Hi, this is Mr. Seymour, and we're going to talk in this lesson about Chapter 11 in your textbook, which is an examination of the United States Congress, which will be the first of the branches of government that we're going to take a look at in our examination of government, American government. Now, this particular chart is it will be provided for you online as well. This is an overview of the branches of government and the organization of the United States federal government. And the Constitution establishes three branches. One of those branches is the legislative branch, which is the one that we're going to look at today, which is Congress. Congress consists of the Senate and the House, an upper and a lower house. House of Representatives is designed to represent the people, and the Senate is designed to represent the states. That was the original intent of the Constitution. Now, of course, we have direct elections to both houses, so really they both represent the people now. The executive branch then would be the president, the vice president, and the executive office of the president, as well as all of the specific executive departments. The judicial branch then is the Supreme Court and all of the inferior courts, which includes the United States court system, the district courts, territorial courts, international courts, and so forth. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our examination of Congress. This particular lesson is going to look at representatives and senators. It's going to look at some specifics about congressional elections. It's going to look at the organization of Congress and how it's organized to make policy. It's going to look at the process of lawmaking, and I like to call this the sausage process, because we all are interested in the final outcome. No one dislikes a good, well-cooked hot dog, but we certainly don't want to know what goes in it. And sometimes the congressional process can get rather messy, and what we care about is the outcome. And then when we have a situation like what we've had in the last few weeks, we all stand by at Congress and say, well, geez, you can't get anything accomplished. And then we don't ask ourselves why. So that's one of the things that we want to look at, is how does Congress get what it needs to accomplish? We're going to look at first at our representatives and our senators in our congressional elections. So let me go on ahead and get started with that. There are 535 members of Congress. That includes 435 representatives and 100 senators. Basic civics tells us that there are 435 representatives that are aligned and designated according to the states according to the level of population. That's why we have a census every 10 years. The 100 senators are evenly distributed, 2 senators per state. The House members. To become a member of the House, you must be at least 25 years of age and a United States citizen for the last 7 years. A senator must be at least 30 and a United States citizen for the last 9 years. All members must reside in the state from which they are elected. Now, for members of the House and the Senate, I like to apply what I would like to call the Arnold Schwarzenegger test. Could Arnold Schwarzenegger be either a senator or a congressman? And the answer is yes. Even though he was born, he's not a United States citizen by birth, he does not have to be if he wanted to run for Congress or for the Senate. Now, the Constitution originally sets the number of House members at 65 and left the future size of the House up to Congress. The only condition was that the number of representatives could not exceed one for every 34,000 people. Right now, we have one for about every 600,000 people. The Congress expanded the size of the House to its current size of 435, where it has remained since 1912. Now, every 10 years we have a census, and the number of seats in the House are reapportioned. According to the 1910 census, the population was 92 million people. 435 representatives left us, one representative for every 210,000 people. The 2000 census left us with a national population of about 281 million, which means that there's only one representative now to every 647,000 people. There isn't any reason why the size of the United States House could not be expanded, but it would take an act of Congress to do that. So let's take a look. This is going back a few years to the 112th Congress. We're in the 114th now, I believe. So we're 2 Congresses away from this particular statistic. In that time, this is like 2011, 2010, the Democrats had 257 people in the House and the Republicans 178. The 2010 election actually changed this number and flipped it so that the Republicans had the majority in the House, and they maintain a majority in the House now. So since this particular snapshot was taken, the House has changed its leadership. The Senate, there are 100 total senators, 56 Republicans and 56 Democrats and 42 Republicans and 2 independents. There are no independents in the House. 363 of the House members were men, 72 women. Considering that the population is a little more than 50% women and a little less than 50% men, you can see that this is not representative of the entire population. The question becomes why, when the glass ceilings are being broken in so many other areas, is there still a glass ceiling with regard to women in the House and in the Senate? Because both are disproportionate in terms of representation and in comparison to the population as a whole. This also holds for other races and ethnicities. If you look at the percentages of the population and you compare them out to House representation by ethnicity, you will find that the representation in the House and in the Senate is not proportional to the population. The House tends to be male. It tends to be well educated. They tend to be rich and white. And this is not necessarily representative of the population today. We're going to look at that phenomenon a little later. 53% of the House is Protestant. 55% of the Senate is Protestant. Roman Catholics are 31% of the House, Jewish 7%, and other and non-specified 9%. So if you look, we tend to be very overpopulated in the House and the Senate with white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. And prior occupation. Politics and public service is the number 1 prior occupation. The number 2 prior occupation, at least in the House, is law. And this would make sense, business, education, and other. Particularly in the Senate, the number 1 occupation is law. African Americans make up 10% of the House members and 13% of the total population. 1 senator is African American. That's only 1%. Hispanics make up 5.5% of the House and 15% of the total population. 3 senators are Hispanic. That's only 3%. So can you see the disproportionate representation? There are 4 House members and 2 senators that are Asians. Native Americans only have 1 House member, no senators. And then females make up more than 50% of the population, but only 17% of the members of Congress, with 72 in the House and 17 senators. So the question is this descriptive representation? Descriptive representation means representing constituents by mirroring their personal, political, and relevant characteristics. Substantive representation means that you represent the interest of groups. It is not descriptive representation, it is substantive. And that's very important to understand, that Congress is substantively represented and not descriptively. We tend to vote on the basis of issues, not on the basis of who looks or acts like us. If we did, it certainly wouldn't be the percentages that we see now. Now let's look at congressional elections. So we want to identify the principal factors that influence the outcomes of a congressional election. Who wins them? What advantage does incumbency have? What is the role of party identification in a congressional election? How does an incumbent get defeated? We saw this with Congressman Reyes being defeated by a first-time candidate in the Democratic primary here in El Paso, which is rare, and we'll find out why that happened. What happens with open seats and how stable change within the House and the Senate. Now, who wins elections? Most of the people that win congressional elections are incumbents. These are those who already hold office. In congressional elections, incumbents usually will win. In House elections, it's 90% of the time. And in Senate elections, it's 60% of the time, at least. The incumbency factor in congressional elections. House incumbents tend to win more often than not, and you can see that with the green line. Senate incumbents tend to win more than 50% of the time, and usually anywhere from 80 to 90% of the time. So what advantages does incumbency give, and why are so many House members incumbents? Because, first of all, you get advertising, free advertising, in the basis that if you show up at a supermarket opening or whatever and you cut the ribbon, you get free coverage, and that's important. Also, ads in newspapers and on television, you get to claim all the things you've done. So credit claiming is very important. Servicing the constituency through casework and pork barrel spending. Also position taking, voting and responding to the questions of constituents. It's only when a representative is perceived as not being responsive to his constituents that we have a problem. And that's where we're going to talk really about why Reyes did not win in 2012. This is the Bridge to Nowhere, which was a very notorious earmark, pork barrel spending. And it was a bridge that was proposed by a senator who wanted a bridge from Ketchikan, Alaska, that has a population of 9,000, to a place called Gravina Island that had a population of 50. And he happened to live on Gravina Island and didn't want to have to take a ferry to the airport. So he proposed and got passed a $1.4 billion bridge from an island that had only 50 occupants, all of whom were very rich, and they all of whom contributed to and supported his campaign. Later on, this particular senator was killed in a plane crash in Alaska after being taken out of office. Now, weak opponents, when an opponent is not well known or well qualified and lacks experience in organization and financial backing, they are deemed to be weak. Campaign spending, the typical incumbent will outspend the typical challenger by a ratio of 3-1, and that was from 2008, and that's even higher now. And Reyes did the same. The only thing was he was up against a candidate with Beto O'Rourke, who actually had kind of an unlimited amount of money to spend. Beto is very wealthy, and he comes from a wealthy family, and his wife has connections here in El Paso to very deep pockets. Party identification. Most Congress members represent constituencies in which their party is the clear majority, and most people identify with a party and they reliably vote for their party's candidates. 90% of voters who identify with a party vote for the House candidate of their party. So party identification and party labeling become very important with regard to congressional elections. So, defeating an incumbent. How does one defeat an incumbent? One is that the incumbent is tarnished by scandal or corruption or becomes vulnerable. Redistricting may weaken an incumbency advantage because it leaves new seats open or it shifts the demographics. Major political tide waves can also defeat incumbents, as in 2010. Also, the number one way that one generally gets into the House or the Senate is through an open seat. Open seats have a much greater likelihood of competition, and that's where most of the turnover will happen. Now, why is it that most people tend to vote for the same representatives and senators? Well, for one thing, stability. Incumbents provide stability for Congress. Change in Congress occurs less frequently through elections. You also have to remember that congressmen are always up for re-election because they're running every 2 years. Senators are running every 6 years. Bicameralism is the idea that you have an upper and a lower house, and that's the way it's organized in order to make policy. Congressional leadership is organized generally through party. The committees and the subcommittees are also assigned by way of party representation. Caucuses are the informal organization of Congress, and you can have all kinds of different caucuses. Of course, the two major ones are the parties themselves. And then you have your congressional staff. We have a bicameral legislature, which means that it's a legislature divided into two houses. The Congress and all state legislatures, except for the state of Nebraska, are bicameral in nature. And let's take a look at some key differences of the House and the Senate. Constitutionally, the House, all revenue bills, and this is why we ended up with the problem that we had, all revenue bills must start in the House. And the House must pass all articles of impeachment. Now, when we get to impeachment is more than just removing someone from office. It's the indictment or the accusation, and then the Senate has its role as well. So the Senate must give advice and consent to many presidential nominations, and they must approve treaties and try impeached officials. So revenue bills, that includes spending or the collection of taxes, have to start in the House. And that's because that's the people's house, the people's body within Congress. The membership of Congress is much higher within the House of Representatives, 435 versus the Senate, 100. The House of Representatives is less stable in terms of its leadership. Well, in terms of how often they have to run for office. Every 2 years in the House, every 6 years in the Senate. And the reason for that is they wanted the Senate to be a continuous body, so not all of the senators are up for re-election at the same time. Yet in the House of Representatives, everybody's up for re-election every 2 years. So the term of office in the House is 2 years. The term of office in the Senate is every 6 years. The constituencies of the House are generally smaller, 1 to about every 600,000. The constituencies within the Senate are much larger. So we only have 2 senators in Texas who represent over 4 million, over 35 million people. Terms of office in the House, let's see, we already had that, 2 years and 6 years. Constituency smaller and in the House, larger in the Senate. Sorry guys, I got a little off track here. Centralization of power. The House is more centralized with a lot stronger leadership, and this again is one of the things that contributed to this impasse that we saw within the last few weeks. The Senate has less centralized leadership and weaker. Political prestige, it's less prestigious to be a representative, more prestigious to be a senator. The role of policymaking for House members, they're more influential on budget and spending matters, and they're more specialized. The Senate is more influential on foreign affairs, and they are less specialized. The turnover within the House is small. The turnover within the Senate is considered moderate, but both tend to be rather stable in terms of once you become a senator or a congressman, you pretty much keep that job until you've done something wrong or until you decide to retire. Within the House of Representatives, seniority has a major importance in determining power. How long you've been a House member determines the committees that you're assigned to and whether you're assigned to a leadership role. In the Senate, it's less important because there's fewer senators. The procedures. In the House, there is a limit on debate, and floor amendments are allowed to be limited. So that means that they can cut you off and give you a specific amount of time to talk as a member of the House. Whereas in the Senate, it's unlimited debate. So you have the opportunity for a filibuster. The House Rules Committee determines the rules by which a bill is going to be passed, coming from the House committee before they go into the full House. The Rules Committee is responsive to the House leadership. The Speaker of the House appoints the committee, all committee members, and the Speaker of the House will then work with the committee leaders and with the Rules Committee to determine what kind of debate and attention will be given to a bill. This is very crucial in determining the probability that a bill has of passing. So that's also a reason why you start to see party partisanship and wrangling, because the party that's in control, especially in the House, tends to control the process. A filibuster. I mentioned a filibuster for the Senate. It is a strategy unique to the Senate where opponents of a piece of legislation can use their right to unlimited debate to prevent the Senate from ever voting on a bill. 60 members you have to have 60 members present and voting to halt a filibuster. That's called cloture, by the way. The Speaker of the House is an office that is mandated by the Constitution, and the Speaker of the House is chosen by the majority party. The majority leader is the principal partisan ally of the Speaker of the House and the party's manager in the Senate. Now, this is in your book. This is Nancy Pelosi. Right here, Nancy Pelosi. She was the Speaker of the House. She is now the House minority leader, because we have a new Speaker of the House, John Boehner, after 2010, when you had a shift in in party control of the House. This is the majority leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, majority leader of the Senate. The Democrats control the Senate, so he's still the majority leader. This is the minority leader of the Senate. He's a Republican. This would be Mitch McConnell. This is an interesting picture because you have Nancy Pelosi, minority leader of the House, Harry Reid, Senate majority leader, Mitch McConnell, Senate minority leader, and this is John Boehner, the House majority leader. So the House minority leader right now is a Democrat. She was the Speaker of the House until we had a shift in party leadership. Moving right along. Now we need to look at the role of whips. A whip is designed to work for the party as a party leader who work with the majority leaders or the minority leaders to count the votes before something comes up for a vote, and they use party influence to persuade votes on bills that are favored by a party. The minority leader's role is that they are the principal leader of the minority party in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. So your whips are doing just that. They're whipping their party members into shape. The President of the Senate is, by the Constitution, the Vice President of the United States. The Vice President can vote to break a tie in the Senate, and modern Vice Presidents are more active in representing the President's views to the Senate, and that's their role. Despite the stature and the power of a congressional leader, they cannot always move their troops. And again, we saw this happen. John Boehner lost control of the Republicans, and that's the reason that we ended up with this fight between moderate and conservative Republicans versus ultra-conservative Republicans who are members of the Tea Party, who are trying to take control away from the traditional leadership role that Boehner has had. And a lot of people think that he is, for lack of a better word, a dead man walking in terms of his House leadership. Despite their power in both houses of Congress is decentralized. Leaders are elected by their party members, and they must remain responsive to them. But at the same time, House members and senators are elected by the people, and therefore you will see them with both the issue of having to remain responsive to their constituents, which means they tend to represent regional issues. So, the role of committees and subcommittees. A standing committee is one that the subject matter is something that stands from session to session. Their subject matter of these committees tend to handle bills in policy areas. Joint committees are committees that are formed in order to get both the House and the Senate together on issues. Conference committees are formed when the Senate and the House want to pass a bill, but it's in different forms and they need to iron out the differences. And a select committee is created for a specific purpose. The example here is Watergate, or to investigate something. More than 9,000 bills are submitted by members of Congress in the course of a 2-year period. Every bill goes to a committee, and that committee has the power of life and death over that bill, whether it'll ever see the light of day or a vote. Legislative oversight is how Congress monitors the bureaucracy. Committee assignments are how members of the House get reelected, they gain influence, and they make policy. And generally in the House, it's based on, your committee assignment is based on your term in your longevity, how long you've been serving. New members express committee preferences to party leaders, and those that have supported their party's leadership are favored in the selection process as parties try to grant committee preferences. But the party that is in the minority will not have the same level of leadership or control as the party in the majority, because all of your committee chairmanships are appointed by the Speaker of the House. So therefore, you will find them to be partisan in nature. The party with the majority will have control over all of the committees. Committee chairs have the dominant role in scheduling hearings, hiring staff, appointing subcommittees, and managing committee bills on the floor. The seniority system is how these chairmanships are appointed. Members who have served in the committee the longest and whose party is the chamber majority will become the chair, generally. A congressional caucus is a group of members of Congress that share some interest or characteristic. Caucuses are composed of members that are from both parties and from both houses, and their goal is to promote the interest around which they are formed. So you will see regional caucuses, you will see ethnic caucuses, you will see caucuses around businesses and around issues. The congressional staff, you have your personal staff that provides the constituent service and help with legislation. The committee staff, where they organize hearings and research and write legislation. And the agencies, the Congressional Research Service, the Government Accounting Organization, and the Congressional Budget Office are agencies that work for members of Congress. So this is a member of Congress here that's relying on his staff member to give him information. Here, this is Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico, who is no longer a senator but was, conferring with his staffers on energy. He was on the Energy Committee. So, a bill. A bill is a law that has been proposed and is drafted in legal language. Any member of Congress can draft a bill, but only a member of Congress can introduce it. Actually, what happens is a lot of times the bill is drafted by someone with a particular interest or a special interest group or a member of the congressman or senator's staff. About 9,000 bills are introduced in each Congress, but much fewer than that actually make it through. So how does a bill get through? First, it has to be introduced by a member of Congress. Then it goes to committee. Subcommittee hearings and committee rewrites are going to happen. And then it has to get out of committee and to the floor. On the floor, there will be vote, debate, and amendment. Then it has to, since it goes to both sides, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, you'll generally have to have some conference action, because you can only have one piece of legislation appear before the president for his signature. So that's the role of the conference committees. Then a presidential decision. He will sign the bill into law or veto the bill. This is in your book, How a Bill Becomes Law. In the House, the bill is introduced. It's introduced by a member and assigned to a committee. Then it goes to subcommittee. From the committee leadership, it goes to subcommittee. Then it goes to full committee. Then it goes to Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee will decide how, when it hits the floor, it will go out for action. Then the full House will look at that bill. And then if the full House approves it, it goes over to the Senate, or vice versa. In the Senate, again, the bill is introduced, goes to subcommittee, goes to committee, goes to a leadership to determine how it's going to be voted on. Then the full Senate votes. Then when you get the bill on both sides, you have to usually iron out the bill with a conference committee, and then it goes up for full House and full Senate vote again. And then if that bill in its final form is approved on both sides, then it goes to the president for signature. And it becomes a law. So let's look at the relationship between the president and his Congress. And sometimes they're partners and sometimes they're not. Lately, they have not been partners because we have a split Congress. We're going to look at party, constituency, and ideology, and we're going to look at the role of special interests. The president and Congress are both partners and protagonists. The president attempts to persuade Congress as to what he wants, and that's his agenda. Presidents have resources that they can use to influence Congress, and one of those resources is that, at least within their own party, they are considered to be the leader of their party, and so they will use party leadership in the House or the Senate in order to influence at least their members. But if it's not a member of their party that they need to get more votes, then they'll start to use other methods of bipartisanship, which means working with both sides to try to get a bill passed. So party influence. Party leaders cannot force party members to vote for a particular way, but many do vote along party lines, and that's where the role of a whip comes in. They try to influence, but they can't force. Polarized politics. The differences between Democrats and Republicans in Congress have grown since 1980. With Ronald Reagan, we tended to have what we call a bipartisan Congress. Now, Congress is not bipartisan. It's very polarized, and that is becoming a big problem, as we have seen with the issues, particularly the government shutdown issue, and the idea that you're going to make a partisan point regardless of the effects. So the perception of polarization between both the House and the Senate, as you can see, has risen over the time in the last 20 years. And the differences between what a Republican and a Democrat stand for have also been widening, particularly since the Republicans have had the introduction of the Tea Party since the 90s within their membership. The more conservative members of the Tea Party tend to be a lot more brash in their desires and in their interests. Constituency opinion. On the controversial issues, members are wise to vote on the basis of what their constituents want, because otherwise they'll get voted out of office the next time they're up for election. And ideology. Ideology is the dominant determinant of a member's vote on most issues. And ideology is what you stand for. And oftentimes that means that you vote opposite from what your constituents want. But then again, if your ideology and the ideology of your constituents do not agree with each other, you will probably end up losing your office at some point. Now, the role of lobbyists and special interest groups. There are 35,000 registered lobbyists that represent 12,000 organizations that seek to influence Congress. The bigger the issue, the more the lobbyists will be working to influence the votes of legislators. Congress can ignore, reject, or regulate lobbyists. And but at the same time, many times members of Congress or their staff will become lobbyists themselves. So we see that the effects of lobbying don't go away. So let's look at congressional elections. Incumbents usually win re-election because they usually draw weak opponents. and they're usually better funded and better known. Typically, they represent constituencies where a clear majority share their views and their party affiliation, and they can claim credit for aiding their constituencies. So this is why oftentimes you will find incumbents winning the election. Incumbents can lose if they're involved in a scandal, if their policy positions are substantially out of line with their constituents, or if the boundaries of their districts are redrawn, or, of course, if they leave their office because they're retiring. How Congress is organized to make policy. The House is larger and it's characterized by more centralization of power, and the party leadership tends to play a very important role. Senators are more equal in power, and they have the option of filibustering to stop a majority from passing a bill. So you tend not to have as much of the partisanship in the Senate as you do in the House. Congressional leaders are elected by their party members, and they have to remain responsive to the party. They cannot always depend on the votes of their members of their party, and committees and committee chairmanships and memberships are very important, and that's how the party basically controls and oversees the administration of policy, and that's how they can control the process of a bill becoming law. Committee chairs have the power to set their committee's agendas. Congressional caucuses are those meetings or those groups that are composed of members of Congress who have a shared interest or characteristic. They can be personal, committee, and agency staff. These provide policy expertise and constituency service, and so it's important to understand who the staff members are. Then we had our process. The process for considering a bill has several stages. Presidents will try to use their executive power to support the policies that they want to become law, but that doesn't mean that because a president says he wants something to become law that it will. Parties are more homogeneous and polarized, and they provide an important pull on members of most issues. And so, when you have a mixture of a president from one party and then a lack of party leadership or a lack of party control over both houses, you will see in this, as in the case we have right now, that you're going to have a lot of contentiousness between the president and the members of Congress. Constituencies do have influence on congressional decision-making on a few visible issues, while members will vote by what they feel their ideology is, and those they will exert influence on less visible issues. So the more important an issue is, the more that the constituencies tend to have a control over those issues and the way that their representatives vote. Interest groups play a role in more than just informing Congress and threatening Congress or the Senate with, well, if you don't vote the way we want you to, we'll make sure our money goes to somebody else next time. And that does influence the outcome of votes. You need to remember that Congress is an elite institution. It has to be responsive to the public when the public makes its wishes clear. It's open to influence, and that makes it responsive to interest, but it also may reduce its ability to make good policy, and that's when you end up with policy gridlock. The members of Congress often support expanding government to aid their constituents through pork barrel spending. Generally, this is in response to public demands for policy, but it can also be to fight, many congressmen will say that they're going to fight the limit of the scope of government, yet at the same time, when it comes to their constituencies, they won't, because they have so much to lose. And that is the end of this particular chapter's discussions. So we'll see you back for the next lesson, which should be lesson 12 on the executive, and then lesson 13 we should be doing the bureaucracy.